I just thought we might all arrive together by just taking a little bit of a centering and connecting in with self first, and then we'll connect with each other energetically and then with the work. So I'm going to invite you, if you have pens or paper, just put them aside for the moment and really make the journey from out there to in here, into yourself, because that's where you'll actually get the most benefit from being present. And just make good contact between your feet and the ground, and even feel your feet, not just with your mind, but actually notice any sensation, sense of aliveness, any temperature. And then moving up to your sit bones, which yogi people often talk about at the bottom of your torso, and just press lightly into your sit bones, and you won't see it, but your spine will immediately become a little bit more upright. And that allows the energy to flow more freely and for you to have access to your prefrontal cortex. And then let's become aware of our breath. And, our breath is always with us. And sometimes we forget to breathe when we get busy. So just notice where your breath is right now, without needing to change anything, just appreciating it. And I'm going to invite you to leave a long, slow exhale out through your mouth, out loud if you can. And then just a breath upwards, imagining it's like a spiral. So as you breathe up, you become a little bit taller. And again, your breath can flow more freely and the energy can flow more freely. And then again, when we're busy, we forget that there's a lot of space around us because everything starts to close in. So just for a moment, get a sense of the space around you. Even if you're in a small room, there's always some space, and there's space within you as well. So just for a moment, get a sense of greater space within you. And then for a moment, get a sense of equalizing the cabin pressure. Imagine if the energy to your left and right, your front and back, above your head and below your feet were equal. And let's extend that energy out to include all of us. Even those who might listen in later, I'm still including all of you. And anybody who's in your thoughts. We're in this together, all doing our best as human beings. And lastly, invite in a quality of energy that could be a resource for you. And it could be ease at the very minimum, or it could be openness or generosity. I'm working with quality, which might sound strange, but it's luminosity. And it's about bringing in more brightness, more light, and a sense of more capacity. And I know Damien is working with quality for some time as well. And he might even share with us what that is. I didn't hear that, Damien. Sorry, you're on mute.
Compassion.
Compassion. So imagine if we all had our different qualities here in the space, what an amazing energy we'd be carrying together. So from that place, I'm kind of curious, we're talking about this topic because it comes up quite often in my work as a supervisor, and I know Damien and myself often talk about it. I'm wondering what sort of questions you're holding or what's brought you here in relation to this topic. So Damien, would it be a good idea to invite people just to put in a question that they'd like to offer us? We may not be able to answer everything.
Yeah, so if you are holding questions, please feel free to put those in the chat panel, just so we get a sense of your intention, your interest, and I can make sure that I'm holding this conversation in a way that's going to answer those questions for you. So I'm just going to pause for a moment to see if there are any questions around this whole theme around power imbalances in coaching. Great. Thank you. Thanks for those first two that have come in from Janice and Kat. Lovely. So Monica, whilst we're waiting for any other questions come through, and we can read those as they're coming up. Maybe just say a bit about why, when we discussed having a session on this, why are we talking about power imbalances?
Well, I suppose, first of all, I always think coaching is a very empowering kind of space for the client, for their organization, and for the coach too, quite often. And sometimes as a supervisor, I have found coaches coming to me who actually feel disempowered, sometimes by the fact that maybe a client is very resistant and they don't know how to serve them well. Or sometimes it's that they're working within an organization, internal coaches, for example, and it feels like something is getting in the way of the coaching and its success. Maybe sometimes a line manager is interfering in some way or looking for information, or that they're given negative information about the client beforehand that kind of colors them, and they try to. So there are, and actually it's interesting, there are power imbalances externally, but also internally. We carry our own stories that sometimes get in the way. So the reason, why I wanted to bring this is because it's very prevalent.
Yeah, thank you. And, and I'm sure as coaches, the people that are listening to this, have thought a lot around potential power imbalances, and the whole purpose of contracting, etc., to try and neutralize some of those. But just when we talk about power, are you okay just saying a bit more about, I appreciate the examples you just given there in terms of what may be playing out with a client or in the system, etc., the internal narratives that might be at play, but just say a bit more perhaps about what we mean by power.
My sense is power can be healthy or unhealthy. Wendy Palmer, the lady who I've trained with, talks about bright power and dark power, different kinds of power. And healthy power is the kind where everybody is in their adult really and is at choice. And, I think of the kind of where everybody is can engage from a place of free choice. And for example, where coaching in an organization is set up well to work, where it's positioned well and it's understood that it's for the right purpose. And also where, the sense of empowerment, where people their power is enhanced, their personal agency is enhanced. So healthy power is where things are set up to work well. And unhealthy power, it's not intentional, but sometimes I think of the drama triangle, where the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor are all using power, but in an unhealthy way, in an unuseful way. And when we turn it into the winner's triangle, everybody takes the power and uses it in a more useful way. So, for example, instead of being a rescuer, that you become response-able instead of able. And where the persecutor changes from using power over other people to taking back their own agency. So, and the victim asks for what they really need. So taking the power first to be vulnerable and then for really asking. So healthy power is really important in coaching. And how we use our power as coaches and how we invite our clients into their power is really central to the success of the coaching. I mean, there's lots we could say about power. I suppose the other thing is, I work a lot with people in Asia and other parts of the world. And sometimes the external effects, for example, of culture, where there's a kind of a hierarchical structure, or where people defer in a respectful way to age or to role, that can be very useful, but sometimes it can be unuseful too, and it can block people. It's also present in organizations. You know, for example, people who work in the medical field, doctors, nurses will defer to doctors, and sometimes lives can be lost if somebody doesn't speak up when something important is being missed. The same with airline pilots. You know, my son is a pilot, and the co-pilots, I remember a story in Air Korea in Outliers, where actually there was a plane crash because the co-pilot didn't have the authority to speak up against a mistake that the captain was making, that he, you know, they changed the whole laws. So there, those external effects, as coaches, we're not going to cause lives to be lost, but we might actually, in contracting with organizations, not ask the difficult questions, not flush out if there's, for example, a hidden agenda on the part of the organization with our coaching client. You know, sometimes organizations use coaches to do what they don't want to do.
Thank you, Monica. And I suppose a couple of things, really. One, as you were talking, I suppose, about the effects of healthy power, I was sort of thinking that sort of felt sense that you have when you feel really congruent, you know, when you're with someone, when that healthy power is there and that agency.
Yes.
And then it also, as you were talking, it just made me sort of think about one of the key learning edges that we need to work through as a coach is obviously imposter syndrome as well. You know,
Yes.
so that sort of sense of perhaps giving our power away when we're feeling less than as well.
And I suppose that brings me to the piece about the internal effects, because sometimes, you know, like with imposter syndrome, but also, you know, in TA, they talk about a script. It's like a story that we create by the time we're 7 years of age. And as adults, sometimes we're still running the story and we don't even know it until we're face to face with something. And there's something I often run a webinar on called deference, which is a very sudden thing that happens, deference threshold, where you lose your power as a coach without even knowing what's happening. And very experienced people sometimes fall into this kind of, it's like an Alice in Wonderland hole, where you end up being in a kind of a fight, flight, or freeze effect. And sometimes it's because you might have a story that you're running that, oh, I can't work with powerful women, or, you know, I can't work with really aggressive CEOs. You know, it can be a different something about our own past experience or about our own family structure that brings stories that are not helpful to us being effective in our role as coaches.
So just say a bit more about how we, because obviously this, like you're saying, this could happen in that moment. Yeah. We suddenly notice that sort of felt sense of shift, you know. But just say a bit about perhaps how we might experience this. What might we recognize that something has knocked us off kilter, you know?
Well, sometimes you might notice that you can't think, you know, you're with somebody and they might look very imposing, or they might, you know, be speaking a lot, and you can't even get a word in edgeways, or you can't think of anything. It's like your mind has gone offline. Or sometimes you might find yourself sort of feeling, oh, well, this isn't working. And you find yourself disengaging and kind of getting smaller and smaller and thinking, wondering when will this be over, wishing it was over. So you're disengaging, a version of flight. Or you might find yourself persuading the client and poking and asking a lot of questions, which is kind of a version of fight, but not aggressive, but it's a kind of a, you know, a forward move. So it could show up in your behavior, but the interesting thing is that, and this could show up in the client as well, by the way, I'm not saying it's one-sided, that it's kind of like a reflex to compensate for this lack of power that something else comes in. But the interesting thing is it happens first in the body. And that's why I'm talking about the embodied response, because we don't know until we're behaving into it that actually something has shifted. And so for us to be able to work with ourselves in that moment, we need to be able to have a practice of something that we work with outside of the coaching around presence, around it could be mindfulness, it could be a centering practice, it could be yoga, but also that we, in the moment, can notice the first signs of what's happening. And some of you who are familiar with me doing the embodied work, I often do something called the flexors and extensors. I don't know if we've time to do it here, but it's almost like your body has a response that's signature to you. Go on, Damien, you were going to say
No,
something.
I was just going to say it may be helpful for people to experience it, because, you know, this whole piece of, as you say, you know, the thinking and the feeling is not something we're going to catch, but, you know, the felt sense of it in the body is really where we start to experience this sense of power shift that's happening. So maybe just, if you're happy to do it just for a couple, I'm sure we've got time for a couple of minutes.
Absolutely. So everybody, I'm going to invite you to stretch out your hands in front of you and begin to curl them up gradually and tighten, 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 and keep tightening and closing in towards your body, still tightening. And then hold it there and notice what parts of your body are involved. You might even notice, like Damien, that your head goes forward a bit, you contract. And then open, 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 and feel the contrast. And then tighten, 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 until you're almost fit to burst. And just again, notice. So for some of you, it might be that your jaw gets tight. For me, it's always my belly first. That's the very first sign to me that something's happening. So I'd love if some of you would share what it is you've noticed. And Damien, what's your kind of first somatic cue?
My breath shifts, so my breath gets very tight, and sometimes I hold my breath. I think that's the first thing I notice.
So Darren says lower back tense. Yeah. Tummy tightens. Every part of my torso becomes tight. Okay, Ali. Yeah. Tight jaw. Yes. Thank you, Tom. Stomach and shoulders. Yeah. It's like we're armoring. Tight breath. Yeah. Lovely. Anybody find their eyes becoming a little bit close? Solar plexus. Thanks, Janet. Jaw. Lots of jaws. And you know, the jaws kind of like gritting your teeth and grin and bear it. Ali closed your eyes, squinting. So it's kind of like everything tightens and closes. So we're experiencing that now because we're doing a terrible, so feel it in your head layer. Yeah, pressure. But in the moment, I would guess that happens you and you don't notice it. And, you know, there are other exercises we could do. And when I'm doing the CPD day, I'll introduce you to some more. But I'm inviting you to get really curious about the very first sign in your body when you're with a client. Because if you start tracking yourself, you might notice that it's exactly the same thing is the first sign when you're in a conversation that feels a little bit uncomfortable, or when you're with a client who feels a bit more challenging. Just become curious about those little signs, because if you can catch yourself, you can change your state. You can maybe breathe or pause. It doesn't have to be big and dramatic. It could be as simple as just taking a breath, or even changing your posture, just becoming a little bit more upright. That can shift and interrupt whatever it is that's coming in. Back to you, Damien, just to check. You know, are there questions?
Well, I suppose I just want to build on this a bit more. So, you know, if I'm noticing something about a power dynamic playing away, let's say the coachee is being deferent to me. Let's look at it from the other, and I'm noticing there's an impact on me. Perhaps I catch myself, and for me, I would go to my breathing, and that felt sense of my feet on the floor. So there's that sort of sense of sort of regulating myself and staying available. What then, Monica, I suppose, in terms for coaches who are listening, I wonder what's the next piece after that? So I've caught it, I'm aware of it.
So I suppose the first thing I would say is the moment you regulate yourself, actually, without you needing to do anything else, the client begins to feel that, because the mirror neurons work and their system calms. So that's one piece, and you can both think more clearly and speak to each other again. And then contracting and being able to, I always say to people, contract at the beginning of the relationship to be able to talk about whatever comes up, build permissions, because we're human beings, and the minute one human being is with another, stuff is going to come up, you can be guaranteed. And so if we build that into our contract, if something comes up that neither of us expects or feels uncomfortable, can we talk about that from the point of view of making the coaching even more beneficial? Most clients will say yes to that because they want things to work. And also to be able to, sense into what are you noticing in yourself? What are you noticing in the other? And to, have curiosity and compassion, because sometimes, we could get scared when this kind of thing happens. But if we can stay curious and keep our breathing and our centering going, then we're able to navigate it more skillfully. The body is a huge resource in noticing what's happening in us and what's changing in us in the moment. And whenever we need to, we can, again, that could be contracted for. Could we take a breath, or could we pause for a moment if something comes up? Any other thoughts that you have, Damien, based on your own experience?
Well, I think sometimes it's also where this power balance shifts. So if the coachee is shifting the focus to me, and I suppose there is a boundary as well, because this is coaching, it's not mentoring, for instance. So actually, am I able to hold the boundary in a compassionate way, but with authority? Because again, at some level, they're testing the boundary. I appreciate it may not be conscious, but that is happening in this moment. So yeah, like what you're describing, for me, there's more capacity for me to hold that boundary when I'm present and I'm grounded. But I think that at times it may be that we need to, as you say, go back to the contract and have a conversation around what I'm experiencing and be curious about it.
And one other thing that, people have said to me when I'm running different webinars and courses, that fight, flight, and freeze and fawn. Fawn is kind of, playing like a dead animal, but in the case of a coach, it could be that you become really nice, and that you become almost too nice to the client, and kind of, instead of challenging that, oh yeah, that's interesting, but that you can't get yourself to ask the difficult question that needs to be asked, or name the things that needs to be named. And that often happens in contracting into organizations, that clients find themselves being kind of sideswept or sidelined by somebody else's agenda, maybe HR, and they're afraid to ask what their intuition is telling them that they need to ask. So yes, holding that kind of authority in service, not as a power over, but a useful power. Thanks, Janice, for the being too nice. Yeah, it's very easy to happen. And it's our presence will allow us keep coming back to your presence and your breath.
So Monica, there's a real sense here, you said it a number of times about the importance of practice, so we have this capacity available to us, and we both talk about this a lot. So just for the participants listening, in terms of, I appreciate this isn't a sales pitch for your CPD session, but if people are interested in developing more of whether that's centering exercises from leadership embodiment, where could they go to learn a bit more about this?
Well, so in the CPD day, I'm going to be working a lot with the felt sense, actually, and kind of with stuff from the systemic world. So working really with your body and what you feel in the moment. But, you know, there are various resources that they could find. Lots of people are working with embodiment these days. You know, Mark Walsh is one person, Coaches Rising, Wendy Palmer's website, she has something called LEAPP, which you can sign up for an online program that you can follow at your own pace. But at the very minimum, you know, have some sort of a daily, I would say daily mindfulness practice or breathing practice that helps you teach your body to calm itself. So you do it when you don't need it, so that when you actually need it, your body already has that kind of imprint that it can, it's amazing. The body learns very slowly and by repetition, but it doesn't forget. So when you need it, the phrase that you and I often share, as you know, is about Bruce Lee. So I'll invite you to say that one.
Mm-hmm. So in times of adversity, we don't rise to the level of our expectation, we fall to the level of our practice.
Exactly. And that's why practicing outside of the hot seat or outside of the cockpit is really beneficial when you need it in the moment, because you've already got something that you can build on.
Thank you, Monica. And I'm sort of conscious of time, so we're nearly at time. So just to close this down for you, just what else would you like to say to the group, Monica, that are listening?
For me, I think, you know, power is something that we all have a relationship with power. And I think the most important thing is the more we can stay present, the more we can be in our optimum state. And we will be knocked off our perch. Our clients will be knocked off, you know, their presence. But the more we can build our capacity and bring that in, we can navigate things. You know, we can find, I can honestly put my hand up to saying I used to run from things like conflict, and I'm able to stay my ground more and more these days.
Thanks, Monica.